Thanks, first of all, for all of you being here this afternoon, which we think is a extremely important part of our police strategy in making sure everyone in Seattle is safe. We're going to introduce and talk a little bit about our police recruitment and retention plan, but I think we furnished you some preliminary information to help you understand it, and certainly I welcome any questions. But what I want to talk a little bit about is what went into it, how we went about developing it. First of all, we sort of took an academic approach, looking at it, what other cities are doing, both far and near, what's working for these cities in terms of recruiting and retaining officers. We listened. We talked to the officers themselves. We talked to community members. We talked to people in the industry who know a little bit something about recruiting and what incentivizes officers. We also looked at the exit interviews of officers. So in other words, we did what we consider a very, very well-rounded approach. Just last week, I had a conversation with an officer in another state who was considering joining the King County Sheriff's Office and the Auburn Police Department, and I asked this person, well, why would you leave your hometown and come up north, and why didn't you consider the Seattle Police Department? So it was these kinds of conversations that members of my staff and other police officers have had, which sort of formulated what we developed in our police recruitment and retention plan. I also wanted to share with you that I hope we all could agree that just hiring more officers is not the answer to public safety, effective public safety. That is a significant component. This is an allocation resource strategy. We also know that our continued investments in community-based organizations, in faith communities, working with communities, our work going upstream with educational strategies, that all of the other components using technology as example, crime prevention through environmental design, all of the other components are necessary to achieve the levels of public safety that I would like to see in the city of Seattle as mayor. Having said that, I'd like to explain a few of the key elements of the plan, and I want to thank all of the officers, and I want to thank members of my staff and other members of many departments in this work. And when I say I thank the officers, many of you may know that I go to many roll calls. Some of these are at 3 o'clock in the morning, some of them are in mid-afternoon, and I talk to the officers themselves about how they feel, what their morale is like. Do they feel respected? And I ask the question, number one, how can I be a more effective mayor for you? And how do we go about building the trust that we want to see in communities? And how can you help me and I help you build the bench strength? Because many of these officers are working double shifts, they are being disrespected, and they are dealing with issues even in their own lives on their day-to-day jobs that I'm concerned with as mayor. When I talk about One Seattle, that's what we talk about, looking at the whole ecosystem of public safety, talking to the officers themselves, and having the right funding strategy. And I think that's what this plan presents. A few key elements. First of all, we want to expand the applicant pool by prioritizing the recruitment of candidates who reflect our values. So we talk about the right number of officers, and we make it clear in the data that we provided you that we're trying to get up in the 1,400 plus numbers, but not numbers alone, that we want them to understand the unique culture of Seattle, unique needs of Seattle. And so we're looking at those with different backgrounds, those with diverse racial and immigration backgrounds, people with college education or language skills beyond English. We're looking at this new kind of officer that we think are going to be a strong component of the One Seattle vision. We know that financial incentives are critical. That's why this plan offers incentives up to $30,000 for lateral transfers and $7,500 for new recruits, ensuring that Seattle is fully competitive with our neighboring jurisdictions. Now, having said that, these numbers were not arbitrary or random, that we do a national search, we look at a regional approach in our different neighboring jurisdictions, and we have to compete. Let me make that point very clear, that officers have options, like anyone else. So we are competing, and we want the finest officers here, and we make we advance no ambiguities on that issue. We've hired additional staff dedicated to SPD recruitment, greatly increasing our capacity, our focus, and our expertise. And I want to thank the officers themselves. I know them personally that are doing recruiting. They're doing a good job with the resources that they have. And of course, this is an allocation resource strategy, as I said, so we're going to give them more resources. But I've had many conversations about them. In fact, during a recent Juneteenth celebration at Seward Park, I talked to them when they set up a recruiting booth to talk to members of the community. And this is where some of our ideas have come about. So we're going to dedicate more people, some of them civilians, on how we could add more resources to this recruitment strategy. And of course, there's a financial component with that. Quite candidly, we're going to put more resources into recruiting. Marketing plans and advertising budgets and strategies are tools, and we have to have the best tools. And so we have people with backgrounds looking at the existing marketing plans, and so we will revamp many of them and make them, quite candidly, more relevant to people who may not ordinarily consider a career in law enforcement, make them more appealing. We've looked at commercials from other countries to see what they're doing. So again, we're going to get a little more sophisticated in our approach because, as you well know, in the private sector, companies spend a lot of money in advertising and recruiting. And so we have to look at the special, I guess, the unique skills that goes into an officer and appeal to these officers to join our ranks. You also saw in components of our system a redesigning of our recruitment systems and the modernizing of the application process to accelerate hiring, including steps for the first time allowing online application document exchanges and the elimination of travel requirements for physical agility tests and oral board interviews and more. Now, one thing that, of course, has come out of this pandemic is we realized that we can do a lot through computers. Now, while this may sound small, it's actually huge. Because quite frankly, we want to be nimble. We want to make sure we're using technology, we're optimizing our use of technology in how we approach the new officers. And quite frankly, many people are used to these kinds of tools, and so it's high time we look at industry standards and use these tools as well. We're creating a recruiting speakers bureau of respected community stakeholders and partnering with regional business and community-based organizations to promote public service careers in law enforcement. Now, this becomes sort of critical because while I'd like to think that I'm a pretty good-looking guy, hey, you guys are supposed to laugh at that. There are much better-looking people and much more appealing people to members of the public who can actually reach people that I cannot reach as mayor, perhaps other officers can't reach, people who believe in public safety, people who may have personal experiences that warrant the need for really good officers. And we will reach out to many of these people. In fact, many of these people have approached us and they said, hey, we want to see 7-minute response times. We want to see a culturally competent officer, and we're willing to speak on their behalves. So we're going to look at how we use these spokespersons and these respected community stakeholders and use that as one more effective tool in recruiting. Specifically, we're also looking at the development of new programs to support officer tuition assistance and to create a pipeline of potential recruits through local colleges and universities. Now, this has proven historically to be somewhat fertile grounds, but we'll make sure that those who may have an interest and they just need a little push, a little incentive, a little vision exercises with us, and we'll recruit in these different educational institutions to see where fruit may bear. There are also other specific components in the plan that we've presented to you. But at the end of the day, as I started with my comments, more officers is not the answer alone. It's one component. And we will not lower our standards on the type of officer that we want. We want the right number of officers and the right kind of officers. But the fact is that our current staffing has been described as being at crisis levels, that we are asking a lot out of our existing force, that we will approach the city council with specific requests, and that we know in the 84 square miles of the city that this is a unifying element in our city. It crosses racial lines, it crosses socioeconomic lines, that people want to feel safe, and they have a right to feel safe. So under our One Seattle approach and under our recruitment and retention plan, we will not sacrifice quality. And I'll close before the chief speaks by saying, again, I want to thank the current police officers for understanding what our One Seattle vision is all about. Again, I've been at many roll calls throughout all hours of the day, several precincts, and we're not finished yet. And I look at the officers and I look in their eyes and I say, number one, I respect what you do. You're trying to protect and serve. I'm trying to find you bench strength. And I'm trying to change the narrative to unify this city, a city that's been fragmented in recent years, but whose trajectory is only going to be improved by what we're trying to do in the Harrell administration. So with that, I'm going to introduce the Chief Adrian Diaz, who I believe will say a few words on our recruitment and retention plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Mayor Harrell, for your support in promoting our efforts to restore our staffing levels. And thanks to all of you gathered here for getting the word out. Yes, we are hiring, but we are working hard to keep the experienced, well-trained officers we already have. The past 2 years have been incredibly challenging for SPD, and I want to thank those that have stayed with this department. We cannot afford to lose another single officer, especially to other law enforcement agencies, which is why I'm thankful Mayor Harrell's will include a competitive economic package to focus on retention. We know that some of this will have to be negotiated, but there is a commitment. We value and respect our officers and the hard work they do every day. To the officers, you have stayed, you have endured, and you're committed to serving, and thank you. And as the mayor mentioned, over the past 2 years, we've lost over 400 officers to retirements and resignations. While we have hired, we are down 372 deployable officers. And this loss has real impact in our deployment of our city. Our staffing levels currently do not allow us to ensure the high level of public safety the people of this city deserve, and that I've dedicated all 25 years of my career to providing. We have real challenges in our community. On Monday, I spent time at 12th and Jackson, the CID, and 3rd and Pine observing the significant criminal and social issues the city faces. To return to our most responsive levels, SPD needs to keep the officers that we have and hire at least 500 more over the next 5 years. But you should know, despite our current staffing crisis, SPD won't just hire anybody. As the mayor mentioned, the basic motivation of all police work is to help people. So SPD will hire only the most dedicated and highly qualified employees committed to serve. Our dedication to diversity and equity has also resulted in recent success. 50% of SPD recruits hired in 2022 represent BIPOC communities. Now is also the perfect time to focus on why most of us committed our lives to police work in the first place. The challenges of the past 2 years have renewed in many a spirit to serve others, and the profession is a service profession, and we are here to help people. We are proud of our officers who remain dedicated to the people of Seattle, and we look forward to welcoming only the best and brightest, only those who want to serve, but we cannot do it alone. It will take a collective effort with the mayor's office, city leaders, and our community partners working together. We owe it to all of you to recruit only those that will help and serve others. And as many of you know, SPD isn't the only department looking to hire dozens, if not hundreds, of people, which is why I and the entire department celebrate the mayor's announcement today regarding this new recruitment and retention plan. And I'll open it up for questions.
Aaron, I'm with the Seattle Media newspaper. It is well documented the relationship between African American communities and the police department. We talk about diversity. Is there any effort in bringing in police officers that young people, particularly in South Seattle, can identify with, particularly being straightforward, more black officers patrolling the South Seattle area that have that kind of understanding of what's going on in the community?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. So this year alone, we've actually last year we hired 40% of our hires were people of color. This year we're at 50%. So that's number one, we're changing that trajectory of who's coming into the department. The second part is we launched SPD Before the Badge just in May, which actually incorporates a lot of different components. But one is understanding the history and community that they serve, and bringing it from a different perspective, bringing Black history in, bringing Native history in, bringing Latino history in. Because I want officers to understand who they're serving and what their level of service is going to be committed to. And that's going to be for all new recruits that are coming into the department. No, thank you.
Let me just piggyback on a question. I'll come back to you. Let me be very specific, Mr. Allen. About 2 weeks ago, I was at a roll call, and I met a gentleman who graduated from Rainier Beach, an African-American officer. We had a delightful conversation. My first question is, well, you went to Rainier Beach. I won't hold that against you since I went to Garfield. But tell me why you decided to become an officer. And my second question is, can you help me recruit more officers? It's really, at the end of the day, it's as simple as that our officers could be the greatest recruiters in the city. And they have to believe in what we're trying to do. So yes is the short answer, as the chief said, and on a granular basis, I'm talking to people who have come from the community, but helping our efforts in recruiting. I think there's a question back there.
So far this year, how many police officers have left the Seattle Police Department, and how many officers have you hired?
So we have lost 109 officers this year, many of them to retirements, not to resignations. We hired a lot in the late 80s and early 90s, so we do have a lot of people that have had 30-plus years, and this is their time that they are leaving. I've hired about, right now we're on pace, right at 35, just at the end of this month. We should be at 35 this month. So.
Retention. So if officers are leaving in large numbers, the retention plan doesn't seem to include any retention bonuses. Why the focus on recruitment and lateral hires rather than retention? And then secondary question, what is this going to cost?
So it does actually include, some of it is going to be negotiated. There is a comprehensive economic package, but some of that is being in negotiation. So can't highlight like a dollar amount to that very specific piece of it. And then there's other things that we're focused on, levels of wellness. So finding a shift that works for officers. We're hoping to get a little bit more time off for officers because, this line of work, a lot of stress, a lot of response to shootings and different calls for service, and you need that extra time to take. The other component is also trying to also look with an education incentive plan as well to be able to cover some of the tuitions for people that want to seek higher education as well.
I'll clarify that, Erica. This plan will be presented to the council with approximately $1 million price tag, which is in addition to the $1 million that we had made we had advocated that we received, but this allows us some flexibility in the first million. So basically, in how I described it, it's a $2 million plan, giving us flexibility in the first million. This will then educate us during the budget process for next year, in the next 2 years, in the biennial budget, to see how successful it is and what other flexibility we need.
Just to follow up on those numbers, why not issue an executive order now to have some money for recruiting this year?
So we've considered that, but part of my approach as the mayor are to work with our council members to allow them to understand why we're doing what we're doing. They all have districts, at least 7 of them have districts. We want their buy-in. We want them to understand that what we believe, what my administration believes, is that people throughout our 84 square miles, they want this kind of recruiting. So rather than have a top-down heavy approach, it's a collaborative approach. And we think in the long run, this approach will pay dividends for this city.
So, but even though while all these other cities are offering recruiting and retention and lateral bonuses, the city won't have anything for the rest of the year, and officers are continuing to leave.
Yeah. Let me make it clear. So one of the reasons why I'm talking to every officer is I said when I was running for office, I'm a pretty darn good recruiter, and I'm a pretty darn good leader. And I need them to understand my vision because they have been demoralized and disrespected. And I say to them that what we're trying to do is, quite frankly, get back to the basics in many ways. So, and I want to make this clear to Ms. Barnett's question, that the retention issues and the monetary issues, we are in SPOG negotiations as we speak. So it's ill-advised to start talking about some of the specific dollar amounts with respect to retention while that's the kind of thing we're negotiating right now. So that's why that's conspicuously not there. we do know from data, from talking to recruiting agencies, from common sense, that these officers that have chosen to stay with the police department, that they have options. And so we recognize, and I verbalize to them my personal thankfulness for that approach. So we're negotiating in good faith, and we'll move forward. So that's why some of that is not in there. I see it. So, yeah, you're standing up too, so you get as many as you want, because they're all sitting down. Go ahead, Matt, go ahead.
I mean, you said retain officers through opportunities and appreciation. I think appreciation is the key word here. The city has a reputation for not appreciating its officers after the defunding movement and the comments by the city council. Isn't that really the biggest hurdle here to prevent people from leaving the department? If it was a good department to work for, people wouldn't leave.
Yeah. So I don't speak for the officers. I'll let them tell you and others what the biggest hurdle for them is. And I want to make it clear that I'm not going into these roll calls alone. I'm going with my senior deputy mayor, Monisha Harrell, and I want to thank you for getting up at 2:30, 3 o'clock a.m. in the morning and joining me, and Tim Burgess as well, former mayor, city council president. And I think one of the takeaways, and Andrew Meyerberg as well, who's joined us as well, one of the takeaways is that point that we say, under our administration, we appreciate what you're doing. And I talk about a police accountability in these forums. I talk about, the Charlene and Lyle situation in these forums. My message is clear, that if we do this right, this is a unifying element in our city. So, but I'll let the officers speak for themselves on why they leave. My job are to encourage them to stay, and that's what we've been doing. Boy, I must just prompted some thoughts there. Jamie, do you mind helping navigate this?
Yeah, have you gotten any input from city council on this? Is there support there?
Yeah. Good question. First good question, by the way. I'm just kidding. Finally, you guys are laughing a little bit here. We got to enjoy the journey together. So all along, we've been talking to council about this. And I met, as recent as yesterday, I was in a council member's office on the second floor. I find my way back to that second floor talking about this. And so we believe the council will be receptive, perhaps not all. And again, I think to Matt's question about an executive order, I want them to see why we're doing what we're doing. So I think it's going to be warmly received. But again, if you haven't picked up by now, I don't like speaking for other people. So let's hope that they understand the message, and more importantly, let's hope they realize what I believe the city wants.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sebastian.
Mr. Mayor, there's obviously a focus on tangible steps to retain, recruit, but how do you overcome the reputational damage to the department, specifically, officers maybe in other parts of the country that have some ill-formed opinion of Seattle, that Seattle's anti-police? How do you deal with the PR aspect of this?
Number one, that's my job, and I surround myself with communications people as well. I was in D.C. this weekend celebrating the legislation the federal government's doing with the Biden administration on gun issues. My job is to promote the goodness in Seattle. That's what I do. And I will continue to talk to each officer. I'll continue to talk to the residents, the employees in the city. Part of the visioning exercises is having a vision of what Seattle can be. So that's how we deal with it. We're not going to give up. This is not easy work, by the way. You think talking to each officer and understanding their pain points. Many of these officers are saying this, and you should know this, Sebastian. They're saying, we want to be trusted. We want to be trusted. We want to be respected by the community. I share the story that when I was at Garfield, that my football coach was a police officer. I would go to this person for advice. That I believe that, again, this is a unifying element. And while, no offense, media, but while the media seems to love perhaps open fights, that's not what One Seattle is about. So we're going to change the narrative, and it starts with this plan. It starts with me being at roll calls. It starts with this chief's leadership. It starts with rank and file, mid-managers, informal leaders. The informal leaders are those people that may not be high in rank and file or their position, but they change the culture and the mood of a group. All of these tools go into changing that narrative, and that is going to be critically important to our success.
You mentioned, I think, said 109 officers have left this year. And those exit interviews, how many of those were because of vaccine mandates, do you know?
I haven't actually done I haven't looked at any of the exit interviews, but I do know, I think it's 65 that are retirements. So that is literally just experience on. And then we had, I think, about 37 or so that were resignations. Some could be to other agencies, some could have been to leaving the profession in general. So that I just don't have the answer for you.
Kind of the opposite question to Sebastian's. What do you say to community members who supported taking services out from under SPD or divesting from SPD, and now you're coming in and committing to having this 1450 number?
I say the same thing that I said when I was running for office and when I took office. Give us a chance to show what an effective police department can do when given the right resources. That everything that I know about organizational improvement would suggest you don't starve a department or starve an organization with resources to get optimal performance. By increasing the numbers, I do not mean increasing violence or unreasonable force. In fact, it's quite the contrary, and that's why specific components of this plan talk about hiring people from Rainier Beach, from South Seattle, or people that may have a background in de-escalation or being culturally competent. So what I say to those people who may say that, who do not want a militarized or racialized approach, I say I agree with you. Who do not want over-policing in underrepresented communities, I say I agree with you. Who are intolerant of unreasonable force, who love de-escalation, I say I agree with you. And we believe that's what this plan presents.
We've got time for about 2 more questions. And Matt, just to clarify too, I think your question around incentives was not about retention, but was about incentives now, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so we sent legislation this morning to council to release funds, those 1 million, the additional 1 million today. So, anyway. Matt,
Well, just a real quick follow-up, and just in terms of the same thing. As you know, the council asked your office to come up with other jobs in the city that could need recruitment bonuses as well. What's going to happen with that request? Because you know the city council is very interested in other non-SPD jobs and incentives.
Yeah. So this is not to the detriment of those other needs, but we do believe that these staffing levels are at a crisis level. So we emphasized our recruitment and retention plan specifically for our police department, but not to the detriment of those other needs. And so we'll continue to look at those other needs as well. It's very clear, based on the response times that we are going to drive, what kinds of priority calls that we want to respond to, that this is a priority at this point during our budget situation, but that work continues to be there and we'll continue to get to it.
Is the goal of 1,400 officers still a realistic goal? Has that number been revised at all?
It is a realistic goal. We'll again look at, and I want to make it clear that this is one strategy of many, that we will continue to look at through our negotiating process, how well our department performs, where there can be improvements, but we think that's a realistic goal and attainable. And again, you know, we set it out there. And quite candidly, I don't think you've seen previous administrations set a bar and do everything possible to achieve it. So that's our approach. We open up the data, we let you see our numbers, and we think it's a realistic goal.
Last question.
It seems like some of the retention piece is tied to this ongoing SPOG negotiations. Do you anticipate that contract being reached before the budget season this year?
Well, let me be specific. When you say before the budget season, I'm going to use that as an October, November time frame. I don't think that's a realistic expectation. But this is what I've said to the officers in the department, that we are going to be very forthright in our negotiations. If we're at an impasse, we'll deal with it, and we're not afraid to go to arbitration if we have to. The thing that I don't want are prolonged negotiations. That's not going to happen. So we're forthright. We realize there's a need. Our negotiating strategy will reflect that, and hopefully we'll have closure very soon. But it won't be before budget. That's unlikely.
Just to clarify, the $30,000 and the lateral transfer, $7,500, that's still pending council approval?
That's part of the package we submitted to them.
That has not been approved yet?
No, it was just submitted this morning.
And do you feel like you have council support to get that passed?
Well, feel is an emotion, so yeah, I'm pretty happy about it passing. I think it's going to pass. And quite honestly, we've been talking to them. And again, I asked even the council members, what do you think goes in a good recruitment or retention policy? Help us out. Again, our approach has been that to, if I meet someone that's thinking about transferring, just like I said, I talked to an officer coming from a state from here. Well, why are you going to the King County Sheriff's Office? I'm not going to denigrate them, but why wouldn't you consider our department? And so when I get this kind of information, even with the council members, so I feel pretty optimistic. We're good. Thank you very much for paying attention to such an important issue for our city. Thank you very much.